Hello, welcome to Trail Talk Live. I'm Eleanor McMahon, the President and CEO of Trans-Canada Trail, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. We have a very exciting conversation coming up and some amazing guests. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the Trans-Canada Trail is situated on the traditional territory of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from coast to coast to coast. We also acknowledge that the Trans-Canada Trail includes land and water routes that were created and used both historically and in some cases presently, by Indigenous people as seasonal travel and trade routes. And because I'm joining you today from Ottawa, I want to also acknowledge the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose people have lived here on this territory for millennia. When I introduce our guests today, I will call on them to also acknowledge the lands from where they are situated. On this edition of Trail Talk Live, we will be discussing a new study entitled The Benefits of Connecting Canadians that looks at the profound impact the Trans-Canada Trail has in three key areas: economic development and tourism, health and well-being, and environmental resilience. I also want to thank our generous sponsors, TD Bank Group, who have sponsored Trail Talk Live through the TD Ready Commitment Program. Thank you, TD, for your support of our organization, our work, in this webinar series. So let's get down to business. Joining us today, we have Dr. Jane Thornton and Janet Sumner. Hello to you both.
Good morning. Hello.
Good morning.
I want to begin by introducing Dr. Thornton, who is a sport and exercise medicine physician and clinician scientist specializing in long-term athlete health and physical activity in the prevention and treatment of chronic disease. Dr. Thornton is an Olympian. She represented Canada for over a decade in the sport of rowing, becoming both a world champion in 2006 and an Olympian in 2008. She now treats athletes and active individuals of all ages and abilities, and she advocates for movement as medicine. Welcome, Jane. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. It's a huge honor to be here with you today and with this panel. I'd like to take a moment as well to acknowledge the sacred land upon which I'm privileged to live and work. I'm in London, Ontario. I recognize the deep connection of longstanding relationship between Indigenous peoples in the land of Southwest Ontario and of London. And so specifically, I'd like to acknowledge the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapewick, and Chinonton nations whose traditional lands I'm speaking from today. So I'm deeply grateful to have the opportunity to be in this place and to speak with you today.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Jane. I'm now pleased to introduce our other panelist, Janet Sumner. Janet has more than 30 years experience working as an environmental leader. For 20 of those, she's been the executive director of the Wildlands League, a chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, or CPAWS. Janet is an expert negotiator, strategist, and communicator with extensive public policy experience, and her life's work has been about keeping and safeguarding our country's nature and wild spaces. Janet, welcome.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. It's a real pleasure to be here and with you and Dr. Thornton in this conversation. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, which is home to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. But it's also home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people now. And our work actually spans across Turtle Island. And we are, I'm deeply grateful to be in relationship in a treaty sense, a true treaty sense, with Indigenous people as we strive to live in coexistence and co-creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. So I'm really excited to, with two of these incredibly knowledgeable panelists, dive into today's topic. As I said at the start, today we'll be discussing the benefits of connecting Canadians, a report published and available on our website, tctrail.ca. You'll be able to find a link to it in the description so you can check it out afterwards. Let's begin by watching a short video clip that our amazing team put together to summarize the report's findings.
Spanning 28,000 kilometers from coast to coast to coast, the Trans-Canada Trail touches every province and territory and joins big and small communities together. The trail runs through tourist areas, urban cores, national parks, protected biological areas, and traditional lands. Its scope is unlike anything else on Earth, which is why TransCanada Trail conducted a study using national survey findings, trail usage data, and insights from Statistics Canada to understand the trail's impact in 3 key areas: economic benefits, public health benefits, and environmental benefits.
So, with that brief overview in mind, I think we've known for a long time that these types of connections and benefits exist, but this study is really the first time in Canada where we are now able to quantify and quantifiably express these benefits. We didn't do this on our own. We hired some really smart people. The study was conducted by eConsult Solutions, a Philadelphia-based firm that specializes in economic consulting and analytical services for businesses, governments, and nonprofit organizations in a wide range of sectors. And as the video said, we use survey findings, our trail usage data, and insights from Stats Canada. We are not going to have time today to dive into all of the details that are contained in the report. But what I found really interesting were the case studies. We looked at 10 local trails across the country and broke down their stats across 3 key areas. For example, in Quebec, Le Petit Train du Nord, which is just north of Montreal in the Laurentian area, we talk about how nature areas save the government $2.2 million that would otherwise have to be spent on other projects to have the same environmental benefit. So just by being there, the trail is making an incredible contribution to people's quality of life, to nature, to conservation, and to the economy. The Amiskwaukee-Meskwana Trail is proudly stewarded by the River Valley Alliance and connects 6 municipalities that border the North Saskatchewan River, including the city of Edmonton, where it can be found along the North Saskatchewan River in the areas downtown in Edmonton. As such, it is used every day by locals for physical activity and active travel, cycling and walking, saving the provincial government $3.9 million in healthcare costs and helping everyone who uses it be healthier as a result. And one more case study to highlight, Martin Goodman Trail, running along Toronto's waterfront, generates an estimated $621 million in economic activity. All of those are impressive numbers. So I wanted to just start with our 2 guests. And before I dive into them, into the sections of the study and more specifics, I'm curious, and I'd like to start with Jane. Anything that jumped out at you from these results?
Thank you, Eleanor. And it's fabulous to read the report because I think what it does is just confirm what a lot of us in the healthcare field have felt, in the sense of there's a cost effectiveness and economic impact certainly about helping Canadians become more active. We know that. But certainly that aspect of the accessibility of the trails. As an avid user of the trail system myself, I was looking back and realizing that 8 of the 10 provinces, none of the territories yet, but being able to access the trails personally has made a big impact. And when I look at the report, I see the wide breadth of the beautiful trail system that we have across Canada. And then from that perspective, and I am coming from a perspective really of someone who was sedentary and until I was about 15 or 16 and then got into the sport of rowing. So even with an Olympic background, I really relate to that ability to just even becoming physically active for the first time can have a major impact. And understanding that a lot of that comes from having something available close by to be able to access. And that's what I love about the trail system. So I think the impact from an economic perspective really confirmed a lot of what we know in healthcare, that when we increase physical activity, time in nature, we are saving billions in healthcare costs and associated cost savings. We know that. But also that aspect of the connectedness for Canadians, that we have this beautiful trail system that spans 28,000 kilometers, and that ability to connect people from a health perspective as well means a great deal. So when I look at that, I think it's great, because I think we do have to have those numbers available when we advocate for these spaces and for healthcare in general. But really, I think it's really impactful to see that across Canada, across connecting those three oceans, it's pretty remarkable that we have the trail system available to us, the Trans-Canada Trail. So again, I just thought it was great news, and something worth really emphasizing across the country.
Thank you, Jane. You remind me of an important, issue, which is perspective. Trans-Canada Trail being the longest trail network in the world, we sit on the board of the World Trails Network. And globally, we are the longest trail in the world, and it's right here in Canada. And when we look around the world and we work with our colleagues in different countries, we are all facing a series of interesting issues relative to the changing climate. But we are all seeing the benefits of trail use right across the globe. So this study, which we've shared with colleagues globally, is really resonating with them as well. So thank you. We have shared it, and we're going to continue to do so, and we think it's going to continue to make an impact as a result, to highlight all of the issues you talked about. So thank you for that. Janet, anything that jumped out at you?
Well, there's a few things, and I may go on for a bit about this, but one of the things for me was I was so glad that you quantified this in terms of the environmental benefits or impacts, or how the trail interacts with the natural world. Because I think for many people, they think, oh, great, it's a trail, I can go and access it. And I'm not trying to downplay that, because I looked at the study and I went, oh, I haven't been to that place. Maybe I should go there. And it just made me think, what other places are there on the trail that I can get out there and experience and have a good time with? And even some places that I might not have realized that there was a trail. So it piqued my interest and made me want to go and explore more of the trail. So that's just a baseline gut response to the study. But I was really glad that you quantified that, because I think it's one of those hidden gems of the trail. And one of the reasons that it is, and that we should not take light of this, is that the way to actually prepare and help solve the biodiversity crisis and be better at the oncoming managing of the oncoming impacts from climate change that we're experiencing already is to create an interconnected network of nature. And the trail helps us do that. While its purpose might be to build a trail so that we can access it and go out and have a good time in nature and experience activity, it is also a vehicle, or can be a vehicle. And certainly what I've seen from Trans-Canada Trail is that you have been wrestling with some of these issues, like how do we do this? And I don't know if that comes out as much in the study, but certainly in conversations that I've had with you, your teams are struggling with this across Canada. What is the impact? How can we better ameliorate it? What can we plan for? How can we make different decisions? And if that happens with Trans-Canada Trail, because it is so large, it creates that interconnected fabric across Canada that will actually increase our climate resiliency and be a haven for species as well.
Wow. Thank you, Janet. Yeah, it's in real time, actually. We're seeing the benefits of exactly what you described, which is by us seeking to quantify these benefits. Not only are the over 500 trail groups that we work with, most of which are not-for-profit organizations doing an incredibly dedicated job at the local level of stewarding the trail, but work like this is beyond their scope and beyond their capacity. And so many of them have said to me, like our colleagues at the Edmonton River Valley Alliance, who enjoy one of the 10 case studies found in the report, they said, this is incredibly important. We're so grateful to have it, because we don't have the money or the resources to do a study like this one. So I appreciate you calling that out, because I think it's a very valid observation. And Trans-Canada Trail, as the trail sector leader in Canada, we're humble about that, because we believe that we have a responsibility to, in that context of leadership, help all of the folks that we can in the trail sector make exactly the case that you're talking about, because we know that trails offer things that you know so well, Janet: wildlife corridors, connecting protected spaces that you mentioned, connecting and protecting our marine trails as well, which are so vitally important on so many levels. So hopefully this report rather opens a door to those bigger conversations that you've touched on. And I know that later in the show, we're going to talk more about climate and nature, Janet, the twin crises. This is where you live, and this is where we aspire to be. I'll close with one anecdote. We're seeing in the United States some pretty dramatic things happening, not that it's unique to the US, but as I think you know, we're seeing a migration of wildlife from coastal California into the interior of the United States. And our colleagues at the Pacific Crest Trail have quantified that and have looked at how wildlife are using their trail system as corridors. And so those are very important findings for us as well. So together, I think we're making a very powerful case. And again, it's opening a door to those bigger conversations. So thank you. In addition to those things that really resonated with me, the economic impact of the trail is something that really struck me. And when I talk about the overall economic impact, which is a very large number, $23 billion a year, it really, it's notable, but breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, we think helps everyone to understand that since 80% of Canadians live within 30 minutes of the trail that they live close to is having a profound impact on their quality of life, on their health and well-being, and on the economy and the viability of their community. So from my perspective, that's just one of the statistics that jumped out at me. And I know we're going to unpack it a little bit next as we look at the economic benefits. So we've prepared a bit of a video that outlines those impacts, and I think we're going to show that now.
Whether using the trail for recreation, transportation, tourism, or connecting with Indigenous lands and experiences, trail users are accessing goods and services from nearby businesses to the tune of $13 billion annually. This economic activity, in turn, supports more than 221,000 jobs across the country. The result is a combined annual economic impact of $23.1 billion.
Powerful numbers. These economic and tourism findings are pretty big, but not surprising when you consider that the Trans-Canada Trail crosses the entire country from coast to coast to coast and runs through each of Canada's major urban centres. I want to speak a bit about how we came to that $23.1 billion number. There's direct spending. That's when a trail user, all of us, when we visit a shop located near the trail, or we buy something to enjoy on our walk with friends, or when during or after our trail visit, we enjoy a meal or a visit to a local store that sells something that we might need on our trail journey. That direct spending accounts for $13 billion. But there are other spillover effects too. The local businesses, restaurants, and attractions that hire employees and pay suppliers to operate. That means that direct spending results in supporting those 221,000 jobs that we spoke of, generating $7 billion in economic impact through wages. And there are other downstream economic activities that we can mention. I don't think that any of us here are economists. We have a physician and clinician and an environmental leader on the panel today. But I think you get the general understanding of how the trail is a driver of economic activity. It's important when we think about the economic activity generated through tourism that we just note here that the work that we're doing at Trans-Canada Trail is from the perspective of regenerative tourism. To unpack that a little bit, Janet, I wonder if you and I could talk a little bit now about the regenerative aspects of tourism, how Trans-Canada Trail can show leadership when we invite people to enjoy our trail networks in a responsible way. And we can talk about how trails tourism can really pay dividends from an environmental perspective, done right. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm actually going to start with, I think you've underestimated the impact. And the reason I say that is because one of the things that jumps out to me is that we have the Trans-Canada Trail, but there are many places across Canada that go, oh, look how great the Trans-Canada Trail is. We need to have our own trail. And they might not have hooked it up or created um, a link to the Trans-Canada Trail, but it has inspired. So I think there is actually an inspiration of economic activity that occurs as a benefit of having the trail. I know here in Scarborough, we're building the Meadowway, and I don't know if that's connected yet to the Trans-Canada Trail, but it's certainly in my mind, it feels like the Martin Goodman Trail, like it's like another pathway, and it's building it in a different way. Yes, it's a cycling route similar to the Martin Goodman Trail, but it's actually rebuilding that meadow that goes across, which is going to make sure that we have all those pollinators, et cetera. So I think that there is maybe a copycat effect or an aspiration effect that happens, and so that we there is a building aspiration to have more trail because the Trans-Canada Trail inspires so many people. So I would just say that I might want to take a look at that study and add some to it, because I do think that that's there. Well, and I talked about the connectivity, and that's really very important, that species can't live and have all of the pieces of life functions that they need just in an isolated area like the Rouge, or what we're creating in a new national urban park in Windsor or in Halifax. Especially in these areas where we've got a heavily settled population in Canada, we absolutely must have the trail, because it's going to create that interconnected network. And species need to be able to spread out and move for all of the life functions that they need to, whether it's food or mating or what have you. And for birds especially, right? They're going to, or any pollinators that are trying to move around the landscape. So it's absolutely important to have trail. It gives access to nature, but it also brings people in contact with nature. And they say that if you don't have contact with nature, you're very unlikely to later in life actually care about nature, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like a cycle that builds upon itself. So it's absolutely important to have that. And so the trail helps both on the basically creating that interconnected network, but it also helps with climate resilience. And one of the things that I think we need to never underestimate is that and I know that the trail is also looking into how can they plant species that are important for the area, the right species, et cetera, so that they can keep the natural environment that's there, or should be there. And it actually creates anchors for biodiversity, but also a climate resilience. And I can speak to some areas where we see plantings that have actually created, maybe they create a sense that the environment is able to absorb more water or release it slowly. And whether that's near Burlington or Windsor or all these places that are suffering from climate change, or the rivers that run through Edmonton, those kinds of things, we absolutely need to have more nature, and having people who are there taking care of the trail, thinking about the trail, recognizing when it's in trouble, when the environment has shifted, when there's been a wildfire, or there's been a drought, or there's been a flood. How do we remedy that? And people literally taking care of the place that they live near. And that creates connection, but it also creates greater resilience. So all of those things are very important, and that's what the trail brings to that. And I think it's a great investment into our natural world, and it brings people into a space where they're caring about its future.
Thanks, Janet. It's you've really sort of spoken to the interconnectedness between biodiversity and human health, and this is where Jane comes in the context of maintaining our health, the health of the world around us. I would venture to say we have a responsibility, certainly at Trans-Canada Trail. We believe that we have a responsibility to play an important role, to do all the things that you talked about, Janet, to work with our partners like you who are in the space, who are looking at the changing climate and its impact on nature and biodiversity. And we take that role really seriously. So as we continue to explore how we can leverage studies like this one to advance that conversation, we're also thinking about our own health and well-being as a species. And maybe I'd turn to you now, Jane, just to think about and talk about, the impact, yes, on our human health, but also on our ability to interact on a physical and mental health basis with the world around us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And I love Janet's points because I think there is such an interconnectedness. And I think now in medicine and healthcare in general, we're understanding that it's not that it hasn't been explored before, but not to the extent, I think, since the pandemic, since our understanding of the climate crisis and so on, that everything is interconnected, that our own health and well-being depends on the health and well-being of the environments, of the species around us, of nature in general, of that ability to that aspect of One Health, that we are all very reliant, and probably more reliant than we ever thought on our ecosystem and so on. And I think what's been great to hear in terms of this renewed I think emphasis on being outdoors, being active, understanding that it's critical for human health to be outside in nature and to be moving if possible. And I think that's really coming to the forefront in a way that it hasn't before. I think of studies that have looked at, I mean, even when we look at the recent pandemic, I think one of the things that's come out in public health is that we have to think about the best buy for our public health, in the sense of what do we need to invest in? How do we prepare for future pandemics? How do we prepare for climate crisis effects on our health and so on? And I think it comes back to that aspect of, first of all, physical activity being in a major investment as a best buy. It's not a luxury item for people. It's something that we are programmed in order to do, to be outside, enjoying nature and moving around. And the trail really provides that opportunity to do so in a very impactful and accessible way. So that's what makes me think, when we think about the interconnectedness, we have to think about whole systems solutions. And that's why it's not, I personally advocate when I'm talking to my patients, it's not about going on an elliptical in a gym, for example. For some it may be, but the impact that someone can have instead of going for a walk on the Trans-Canada Trail system, the impact is magnified. Certainly, it's so much more because of some of the potentially the impacts that we don't necessarily see from a health perspective, that we might not be able to measure, but that ability to appreciate nature, as Janet mentioned, to be able to say, hey, we're going to invest now that we appreciate what's happening in our environment, we will invest in it more so in the future. We'll bring our young kids along and help them appreciate nature and understand those side benefits to health. But then you think about, and we can dive into this a bit more, but even in the sense of the social impact. So not just, headphones in on a treadmill or something along those lines, in your zone, which is fine, but the extent at which you can bring your community with you to enjoy the trails, and the extent that you can meet new people. There are walking groups, there's learn to run community programs, there's people cycling, wheeling, if they're not able to walk, for example, people with disabilities, understanding that they too can enjoy nature and the trails to the same extent. So I think all of those, when I see it, is that there's so much of a value add. And I think as Canadians probably started seeing that much more so, even there's probably a bit of an uptick at the start of the pandemic when things were shut down. And I think that was the reality, is like, where do we go we can't be physically active anymore. What do we do? And, as you've mentioned too, Eleanor, the aspect of creating that space for people to actually be active, to be on the trail system was huge for people's mental, physical, social, and spiritual health, in that sense of being able to do something, have some autonomy over that. And interestingly, I think that's really remained through the past few years, is that people really find that solace, that ability to rejuvenate themselves a little bit by being on the trail. So again, I can't, when I speak to patients about physical activity, and I do that on a daily basis, that's where it comes down to: get out in nature if you can. It has a massive amount of health benefits, but for all of these other side benefits, we have to really get out there and enjoy this beautiful trail system that we have.
It's so interesting you mentioned that, Jane, because we've had Dr. Melissa Lem on the show before. You may know
Right.
Melissa, and
Yeah.
Brooks Prescriptions. And Imagine physicians actually prescribing people, here's a prescription, spend 10 days outside, 10 minutes,
Exactly.
sorry,
Yeah.
outside every day.
Yeah.
And that is going to contribute significantly to your mental health and well-being and your physical health.
Mhm.
And then hopefully that 10 minutes turns into 20 or 30 eventually as we continue to reap the benefits of being outdoors. I know myself, especially during the pandemic when I was inside, we all were working away at home. Just that ability. I have a dog, so he comes outside with me, and he's really been a powerful catalyst for me, certainly back then and now, to get outside, to spend time outdoors. And the minute I'm outdoors, it instantly changes my mood. And I think your message to your patients about exactly that is finding an easy way, an accessible way. And we really are on a journey to make the trail accessible to Canadians, even more so than it is now, and those with disabilities in particular. So having those abilities to access nature, having the chance to do so is, and making it easier for people. And Janet's touched on this in our previous conversations. The trail is accessible in the sense of affordable. Right now, when times are tough economically, you can get out on your trail locally, and it really doesn't cost you any money at all. Trails are free.
Exactly.
Nature is available to you. It's right around the corner, and its benefits are enormous. So interesting, isn't it, to think of these things in conjunction with one another?
Absolutely. And I do like that sense of that accessibility for cost. That has a major impact on the patients that I see as well. Oftentimes, just because of our healthcare system as well, it's that ability to make it easy. And in the sense, if we want to think about behavior change, if we want to think about the what we can do and play our part, it really can come down to trying to improve access, make things easy for people, make activity, being outside in nature, the easy choice for people to make. And that's why I think it's so critical to invest in elements like the Trans-Canada Trail system, because it does offer all of those benefits in the sense of really being equitable when we don't always see that, especially for health services. We don't always see that access to the best treatments are available to all, certainly. When we think about treatment, and we do see that, we see physical activity helping people in over 30 chronic conditions. So it is something I talk about on a daily basis for people with chronic conditions. Essentially, having that equitable treatment strategy goes a long way in helping people feel like they can have some autonomy and over their health and well-being in that aspect as well. So a very important point.
Well, this is a really great segue into our next section, which is to talk indeed about the impacts on our human health that the trail brings, and referring back to the study as well. So I think we're going to see a clip now that captures some of that, and we'll continue the conversation afterwards. So let's roll that clip.
Getting out onto the Trans-Canada Trail is an accessible and low-cost option for engaging in physical activity. Whether you are biking, running, canoeing, or walking with friends, the trail is an excellent resource for your physical and mental health. The trail sees more than 2.6 million physically active users annually. This results in positive individual health outcomes and benefits our healthcare system by reducing visits and lowering overall healthcare costs.
Wow, so here we have an illustration of how the trail provides an opportunity for preventative medicine. Just like Mary Poppins said, a spoonful of sugar. This is analogous to that, where we have 2.6 million physically active users of the trail every year, not only connecting to nature and to one another, but they're enhancing their mental and physical health, as we just talked about a moment ago. In fact, in addition to conducting the studies like the one we're showcasing today, we regularly survey Canadians about their trail use. And you may or may not find this surprising, but Canadians are amongst the most avid trail users in the world. 72% of Canadians tell us that they use trails on a daily or weekly basis, and that's incredible. And not surprisingly, 95% of Canadians told us that they use the trail in support of their mental health, and an equal number noted that the trail supports their physical well-being. So what we know is that physical health and physical activities are interconnected, and the health benefits that lead to reduced usage of our healthcare system are profound. So, with approximately 2.6 million Canadians active on the trail every year, we estimate that the results and the impact are approximately $1.7 billion annually. So, turning to you, Jane, to continue this conversation, in your work as a clinician and encouraging your patients to be more physically active, what are some of the simple things that you recommend to your patients that they can do? Getting out on trails, getting into nature, going for a walk in their neighborhood. What are some of those simple activities?
Absolutely. And I think it can't be overstated, I think, in the sense of what the ability that we have in terms of being able to be physically active. For a lot of people, I think it can conjure up images of maybe gym class and not being selected to teams or things like that. And I think that concept of saying really any time spent doing movement, so 5-10 minutes a day or more, can really benefit our physical and mental health, as you said. But I think of all these other benefits that, in the sense of, and you know, Dr. Melissa Lem is a great advocate in this space as well, understanding that being outdoors, it reduces blood pressure, it reduces our stress levels, it reduces those even our resting heart rate, those, everything seems to calm down once we get in nature. So that has those benefits holistically, not just for physical but mental health and that social well-being that we mentioned earlier. But in the sense of how do we go about that then? I mean, one of the things that we've known in the physical activity prescription literature, in the sense of us normalizing physical activity for patients, is even to do things like, as you've done, get a dog. It's great for physical and mental health, isn't it? And so being able to explore trails that way as well. I tend to tell people, if they're able to walk or cycle or wheel, explore a new part of the trail, those kinds of things, that's great. Make it fun. Make it that time to decompress after a long work day with a friend, talking about your day, or making yourself accountable to a friend or family member, setting goals, things like that. And they can be small goals, but essentially trying to do something along those lines, increasing your steps, those kinds of things. I often tell people that most people, assuming that they, even if they have chronic conditions, if they have something they've been dealing with, new diagnoses or things like that, of course, talk to a healthcare provider, but most people can get out and be active in some way, and using the trail is a great way to do that because of all of those other benefits. You can do things like bird watching or even geocaching, where people use GPS and kind of put little clues and treasures kind of along the way, and just at different fun ways for kids or even older adults and things like that. I find with people, one of the biggest barriers we face in healthcare is talking to people that might have joint pain or muscle pain and things like that. How do they become active? So I counsel a lot of people with low back pain or knee pain, arthritis, and things like that. And I think that it's this normalization of saying, you know what, you do have pain, but what we used to say even 20 or 30 years ago in the field was, if you have low back pain, bed rest 6 weeks. Or even with knee pain or hip pain with osteoarthritis, people would say, yeah, I can't actually do a lot of physical because I'm afraid my joints will hurt. So we start slow and gradually increase walking, but it's fantastic. We've seen a big a surge in people using Nordic walking poles, or those hiking poles and along the trail system, which are fantastic. Not only because they, improve kind of upper arm, core strength, those kinds of things. In older adults, they can help prevent fall risk and so on. But it actually offloads our joints, the hip and knee joints. So people actually do really, really well with using things like that, like gait aids and so on. And so, but Nordic walking poles are fantastic. And those muscles that are used are typically relaxed during normal walking. So it's a way to kind of experience something different. I personally love cross-country skiing, those kinds of things as well, that are maybe less load on different joints if people are finding that burdensome. So I think those are the ways of trying to make it creative. And as someone who loves exploring, I like trying to pick a different segment of a trail and try to see what I can see that's new, and that releases endorphins in us as well, and kind of brings out new joy and new experiences, releases oxytocin, these different hormones that are kind of this feel-good hormone, right? So those are the kinds of things that I say, hey, you probably can't get this anywhere else, so enjoy our trails with all these different things. And you'd be surprised with how creative people can be. Skateboards, as was shown in the video, things like that, lots of different ways to be physically active and also enjoy our beautiful trail system.
I loved those examples, and yes, I'm fortunate to have a furry friend, and so many Canadians purchased furry friends during the pandemic. I see that they're an increased uptake, and I'm guessing that they too were. I got my dog before the pandemic. I've had him for 5 years now, but he really is a wonderful friend, and he loves to be outside as well. So the two of us are often found in my neighborhood and elsewhere. And I was thinking, Jane, of your example. I was out on a visit to a trail in Squamish. We brought our team for our annual gathering. We're a virtual organization now, and since we don't have the regular opportunity to connect once a year, we bring everyone together so that they can really meet their colleagues that they've only seen on Zoom. And it was really great. We went out for a trail walk near Squamish, and we had a really great time with our local trail partners who do such a beautiful job stewarding that section of trail. And I was on my way back. I unfortunately had to take a phone call, an important one. So I said to my colleagues, you go ahead and I'll just go back to the trailhead and I'll see you later. So I started out on the trail on the way back, and I unfortunately got a little bit lost. And instead of doing this, I did this, and I started up, and it is Squamish after all. So if you've been there, it's a pretty mountainous area. So I started up the trail, and I was really enjoying it. It was physically inspiring, and I was getting a good workout. And then I realized, you know what? I'm going down to the parking lot, and I'm actually on a trail that's going this way. I think I'm in the wrong place. And this is where the dog comes in. So I turned around and I texted one of my colleagues and said, don't be alarmed. I think I'm a little bit lost, but I'm confident I can find my way. And this dog came around the corner, and then her owner was not far behind, and he was one of our trail volunteers there. So he kindly pointed me in the right direction, and I found my way back. So I think furry friends are increasingly a part of our outdoor experience, and I see the impact that they can have on our mental and physical well-being too. So I loved that you use that example. I'm thinking of Janet and her trail use, because Janet, I'm going to put a highlight on you and put you on the hot seat here for a minute, Janet. But Janet is inspiring to me in many ways, but she is an avid kayak and canoeer. She spends a lot of time on our river systems and our water systems, not just protecting them, but enjoying them. And many people may not know this, but the Trans-Canada Trail includes many water trails across Canada. And whether you're on the West Coast and the Squamish Sea and the Salish Sea Trail on the east coast of Vancouver Island, connecting us to mainland BC, you really, we're so incredibly fortunate in Canada to have these water trails. So Janet, I might impose on you to share a little bit about your trail experience on the water and how it helps you.
Well, you're right. I do love to kayak. I'm not as big a canoeist. I haven't done very much of that. And that's actually because joint pain, but kayaking, no joint pain whatsoever. So that's my preferred method. But I have done off the shores of the north part of Vancouver Island, but I haven't done the Salish Sea, which obviously when I think about that, that's something that I want to go do. So I actually want to see more of the trail by boat, if you will, whatever that means. And I just love being on the water. So for me, it is absolutely, like when you talk about the benefits, the physical benefits, the mental health benefits of being on the water, like none other. And then, of course, my other trail use would be by bike. I'm not a big runner. I'm somebody who loves to cycle. So I've got a few trails of mine that I want to go and explore. And I've done the Martin Goodman Trail a few times, and I really, really enjoy that. It's just such a blast because it's you're right beside the water. So it's fantastic that way. So I think that for me, being out in a kayak and a boat, it just is... it just like the sky opens up, your whole heart opens up, your brain, everything. It just, it's magnificent. And I want as many Canadians as possible to learn the joys of being out on the water, because it is just absolutely rejuvenating, and it's a different perspective. It's, it's a very different perspective. And certainly Jane probably has that from being a rower, an Olympic rower. So, it just fills my heart when I'm able to get out on the water and it's one of the reasons I live where I do, which is very close to the Scarborough Bluffs and being able to get down into the water here.
It's interesting, Janet, just hearing those great examples. It resonates with me in particular where I live in Burlington, which is just west of Toronto, of course, and right next to Hamilton. There's the Waterfront Trail, and I often cycle on the Waterfront Trail, either alone or with friends, and I love that. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and I remember I was on a group ride, we were riding into Toronto with some friends, and we stopped in one of the parks in Mississauga. And as we were surrounded by families and new Canadians, and I happened to go over and talk to a few of them, and I was really curious. And for them, having come from countries that are so vastly populated and much more than in Canada, where we have more space in our cities and more space generally. They come to Canada, and this woman said to me, I bring my family here so that we can sit outside and be in nature and have a meal and have some time together, because we live in a house not far from here, but we don't have a big backyard. Mm. So being able to be together and be outside, she said, where we came from, we didn't have this. Mm-hmm. And I looked around me and I saw families, but I really saw an abundance of new Canadians enjoying that opportunity. And I wonder sometimes, and I say this without criticism, that we're so accustomed to having these spaces, we don't always take advantage of them in ways we should, because we maybe take them for granted. And that's hopefully what this study does, which is demonstrate that they are worth saving and conserving, and they're so critically important to, as we're discussing today, our human health and protecting nature and the world around us. So all kinds of examples. And certainly when we started doing research on trail use during the pandemic, we asked people actually where they lived. And while we didn't talk about this much, it was really relevant when we looked at the results, because Janet, to your point, people who lived in densely populated areas, their trail use far exceeded others. All of the numbers were high, but people who lived in those densely populated areas, and it got me thinking, I would bet that a good chunk of those folks live in high rises, and they're in condos and apartments. And because it was during the pandemic where we were, enclosed for a good chunk of the day, getting out and getting on a trail because they don't have that access to a backyard became really important to those folks. Yeah. So I really, I agree with what you were saying. It really resonated with our data. Well, all of this conversation about health and the interconnectedness leads us into our next section of the report. Your area of expertise, Janet, protecting nature and the climate, and really, seeing us trails in that position to make an impact in both areas. So I'm going to turn us now to watching a clip about some of the impacts that our study points to in the context of our environment.
The Trans-Canada Trail provides environmental benefits to the communities it runs through in a number of ways. The trail helps to preserve green spaces, which otherwise may be at risk for development and further loss of natural lands. And it provides many climate mitigation and biodiversity benefits too. If the trail and its surrounding ecosystems were removed, all levels of government would incur additional costs to achieve the same environmental benefits the Trans-Canada Trail provides.
So lots there from the perspective of quantifying what we know. And again, that open door to explore in greater depth some of these statistics and what's behind them. So Janet, maybe for our listeners and our viewers, you could help all of us understand more deeply trails in the context of protecting natural spaces and how that helps to improve biodiversity. You touched on it earlier, but maybe if you could give us a little bit more information on how trails play an important role in conservation and improving the biodiversity.
Well, the Trans-Canada Trail system, it's the vast majority of it is going through natural spaces. And because it's going through those natural spaces, the people who are safeguarding those trails and making them user-friendly and that people want to get out in means that they're going to care for nature. And I've seen an uptick in that. And as they care for nature and as they're taking care of the natural world around them, they're thinking about, oh, well, this area is actually experiencing a little bit more flooding. Maybe we need to do planting that will actually make it more resilient. Maybe we've got a lot of birds in this area, but these are the kinds of plants and the tree species that these birds need as homes. Maybe the pollinators that many people are concerned about now, and certainly monarch butterflies, need a little helping hand. And in addition to that, there are all kinds of other species that benefit just from the natural areas that the trail is going through. And because people care about the trail and they love it, like it develops a deep love in their soul and in their heart, and they want it to be a place of beauty and restoration and just a balm for the heart. It actually creates that love that will actually make sure that we take care of nature in that way and not exploit it. But like your statistics talk about, it's if you have a trail there and you're using it and there's a love of that area, woe betide you if you try to change it. If you try to go in and make it into a shopping mall or turn it into an industrial park or things like that, the community itself will rise up and say, no, this is my trail. I love it. And so I think that it creates a resiliency factor that we can't just turn on and off a land use decision, but actually it's seen as being owned and being loved by the people who are taking care of it. So I have a deep respect for the model that you have, where you are working with trail organizations across Canada who have thousands of volunteers. It creates an army of people who now care about nature. It means that when Canada goes to do things like protect 30% by 2030 or protect 50% by 2050, that's where it needs to go. That's what the science says. So if we're going to accomplish that, it means that Canadians need to be connected and loving nature and supporting governments that want to do the right things. But it also means in their cities, like if you're dealing with people in your cities and they're all in little cubicles or in condos or things like that, or they have the least amount of access to nature, that it's going to be a healthier population, a more vibrant population, if it can connect to nature. All kinds of studies prove that. We know that in the pandemic, people were like rushing out into nature, and people are just happier. They're happier in their work life. They're happier in their home life. They're happier just overall. So you create a better environment for communities to exist and thrive. And then what it does is it also creates that interconnected, a woven web of nature so that it is more resilient as a whole. Just creating a park here and a park there, a protected area, is not going to cut it. We're going to need farmers' fields. We're going to need natural areas along nature trails. We're going to need all of those. And especially those freshwater systems. If you've got freshwater trails, that's also going to be needed. That's the lifeblood of nature. Nature needs a place to go. We cannot just, circumscribe a little corner of it and say, stay here, be healthy. That's not going to happen. It's just not. So nature needs to be able to spread out. It needs all of that for its functions, whether it's for mating habitats, or we see sometimes where we haven't thought about this, where we created a nature area on one side of a road and a nature area on the other, and we need to create those connections. So the trail is an important connector, and it helps build that fabric of life, a fabric of life not just for nature but for all of us, and keeps ecosystems resilient.
So Janet, we've talked about biodiversity loss and the interconnectedness and the importance of what civil society is doing, what government is doing, what we can do, and the role that trails play in that context. The twin crises of climate and nature. Maybe I'll just illustrate. I'll get you to talk a little bit about the changing climate and the role that trails can play in that context. In the atmospheric river in British Columbia, which we just celebrated, as you know, the second year anniversary of that event, that enormous climate event, and sadly, I think we're going to continue to see those kinds of climate events. And we're working with the BC government now because we lost 70 kilometers of the Trans-Canada Trail and 25 bridges and habitats that were so important for us to protect, and the role that the trail played in protecting those habitats, and of course working with Indigenous partners to discern how to build back better in that context. Using that as an example, maybe, and thinking about the trail as an opportunity again to build back better. Can we talk a little bit maybe about the role that trails can play in mitigating the changing climate, but also as we build back better, as we think about the 2 billion trees program of which we are a part, and other efforts to build up trail, how can we adapt to the changing climate? So maybe just focusing a little bit on climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and one of the very first things that I think you did was you reached out to me and we had a conversation about the fact that the atmospheric rivers had created this problem, and I was impressed with the recognition that we can't just build it back where it was. That we need to actually start looking at how the natural world is changing and prepare for that and build in to that some future resiliency or a future plan that would acknowledge how climate is impacting our environment. What that does is it changes how everybody thinks. And so it makes everybody connected to what's happening to the natural world from a climate perspective. These are climate impacts that were predicted. All the models said this was going to happen. We're going to continue to see that until we get a real handle on climate change. So it's important for vehicles like the Trans-Canada Trail to be convening those conversations, but to be bringing to bear the science and asking the questions and saying, where is the best place? And not just to say, where's the best place so we can have a trail, but where's the best place that we can do right by nature and plant the right species and have the right conversations that is going to lead to the best impact. And I'm assuming that you're also thinking in ways that are like, because your experience on the trail is enhanced by the natural world. So how can we actually have a natural world there for people to experience? And what does that look like? And how can we plan for that? And how can we make sure that it's still going to be there 50, because these are large investments. You want to make sure they're going to be there in 50 years. And so what does that mean? And if you are doing that, it means that your natural world is more resilient, but it doesn't mean it's just more resilient for the trail. It might be more resilient in all of the adjacent areas and the cities and towns that are around there, maybe helping with flood mitigation, with droughts, all those kinds of things. So if you have a landscape level view, might also be providing avian habitat, might be habitat for species, all those kinds of things that would have previously maybe been wiped out. So I think that the trail can play a really big role for the trail, but also convening that conversation and thinking through that lens that is much bigger. And I'm really pleased to see the Trans-Canada Trail thinking like this. And it's not highlighted necessarily in your report, but I have had direct experience with that, with you and I having that conversation. And certainly we've thought about in the Windsor case, like what could the trail bring? And you're not necessarily connected right into the heart of the city yet, but is there a way that you could bring some consolidating sense to how active cycling happens in the city and making sure that we have nature, et cetera. So there are a lot of different ways. And when you talk about the 2 billion tree program, that's an important program because the objective is to permanently expand Canada's tree canopy cover. That's going to be a big deal. So making sure that the Trans-Canada Trail is part of that because it's across Canada. So this is to me, and it means you have stewards, right? So one of the challenges with the 2 billion tree program is we can plant trees, but will we have people stewarding those trees into the future and making sure that they're still there 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years on? Well, if you have people who love the trail, they'll make sure the trees are there. So that's a really important piece. And then planting the right trees in the right place. Trans-Canada Trail is going to be thinking about that. And I would suggest that we probably need an investment beyond trees, because it's not just about how can we plant as many trees as possible, but how do we rejuvenate our wetlands? How do we make sure we have the right shrubs and bushes and all the rest of it, all of the vegetation plantings that we could be looking at? I think trees is one aspect, but we need to be thinking about all of that because that would actually create a much more resilient environment. So this is my plug for governments everywhere to get involved in regenerating our natural areas. And Trans-Canada Trail, I think, is a great vehicle for that.
Oh, thanks, Janet. Well, it takes a village, I think, too. All
Yeah,
of
it
us,
does.
as you point out, working together to do what we can in support of our planet and
Hmm.
the world around us. I'm maybe going to turn to you, Jane, just to really touch on how this intersection of environment and human health impacts our ability to recreate physically and enjoy the kind of mental health benefits that your patients you want to have them see, and maybe just talk a little bit about that connection between environmental protection and sustainability and health and well-being.
I think it's a great point, and again, this interconnectedness keeps on coming through. That aspect of even just thinking about health, understanding the stewardship, understanding that we will be protecting our environment, our futures, our children's futures. These are a lot of the motivating factors, even just for people looking after their own health as well, in the sense of how can we people that are generally trying to be outside, trying to move outside, being more healthy, are also understanding, becoming more aware of the need for things like protected places and spaces to be active. So there is quite a bit of overlap in those settings. So people who want to have access to physical activity, cycling, those aspects will be the ones that are advocating for environmental spaces as well, and understanding that interrelatedness. As I mentioned, even with pandemics and things like that, with climate change and so on, people are also having a look at their own health and trying to understand what impacts it will play, and even that aspect of can we protect the spaces around us? So if the world essentially kind of shuts down again, that we're not able to travel, can we look at enjoying our surroundings that are close to us in a more meaningful way? Can we interact with people? Can we I mean, you see this across all levels. Can we invest more locally and things like that? And I think this again is where the trail system comes in really nicely. That it has that impact on people looking after their own health in different ways. People looking after the environment, understanding that we have to be future focused for the next generations to come after us. The understanding as well as when we think about air quality and those impacts on our health as well, understanding the need to have trees in our environment, the need to have those canopies, the need to have spaces where we can look after health in ways just not taking medications. Let's think about how we can protect our air quality, how we can protect our shaded areas, so that when the temperature rises, we have places to go that are shaded, that are and again, like that helps our entire ecosystem thrive as well. So I think people are starting to understand that that is that interconnectedness, but it's not also that it's not burdensome. It's in fact, as you said, you go out into nature, we relax, we feel better globally with our mental and physical health. We start seeing other people. I find that there's an increase in kindness. You see people out on the trail system, and I think there's again this new appreciation for what we have, that we'll see people in the morning on the trail, those kinds of things, and we'll say good morning, how are you? People have that interaction that they may not have in other places, even where they're being active, or those kinds of aspects. So I think as healthcare professionals, and essentially I've tried to advocate for that across medical schools as well, and it's doing very well, but people are starting to understand we have to think about how do we promote independence for older adults, for example, that let's help people also enjoy nature across the lifespan. So from little kids to older adults, how are we making those trails accessible, but also understanding the impact that it has. And lastly, I think, again, coming back to the social aspects that we just see, we think about reducing loneliness. Even if you just take loneliness on its own in isolation, those can have dramatic health effects if people feel lonely. And that aspect of being able to be out on a trail in a group, in a new group of people, even if you're just going on, you're taking your Nordic walking poles, you're going to a class, or you're these initiatives that are helping people teach people how to run or to bike, to use the types of bikes that we wouldn't use, like the ones with the fat tires and things like that. They're great for people that may not have used those, even the e-scooters or things like that. Those are e-bikes, great ways for people that are not normally physically active to be able to enjoy our natural environment better. And it's also a way to improve social connectedness, which again has these downstream effects on our health. So I love that it's not something burdensome. In fact, if anything, it takes away burdens for us to be more healthy, but also more aware of our environment, and to be able to really understand and appreciate we've really got to invest in our environmental spaces, not just for ourselves, but our future generations, but we can do so in a really enjoyable way. And that's why I love, when all things kind of come together and you feel like this can have a profound benefit in all sorts of areas. I think that's where we say, okay, we need to look for creative solutions. And this is in fact an extremely creative and also beneficial solution for us. So that's why I just love the overall message that these are people, and the trail system. These are initiatives that we absolutely have to support across the healthcare system, but across these other ecosystems and environments.
Wow. Honestly, I could listen to the two of you all day long. I really could. I've learned a ton just having you in conversation today. And so I'm really deeply grateful. And I know our viewers will enjoy listening to both of you and seeing you as well. And in the context of this report, to have both of you speak to its impact in such cogent and beautiful ways is really such a privilege for us at TransCanada Trail to have both of you here with us today, to amplify what we've seen, what this report means, and to give us the inspiration necessary for us to carry on and continue making the case for why trails have actually become vital infrastructure in our communities, both in terms of our physical and mental well-being. Thank you, Jane, for your expertise in this regard, and to sustaining life on Earth, Janet, through the enhanced biodiversity and trails as a tool to mitigate the changing climate. Every time you're on your bicycle, every time you're walking and not in your car, you're saving greenhouse gas emissions. And that is great for our air quality, as you know, Jane, and great for our physical and mental health. And also for life around us as the pollinators, the birds, the bees, and our friends, our furry friends, enjoy the much needed nature in the world around us so that they can thrive and we can thrive along with them. So in summary, thank you again so much for being with us. I want to thank our friends and sponsors at TD Bank Group for their generous support of Trail Talk Live. They really made this conversation happen. We're big fans of their TD Ready Commitment Program, and they are incredibly generous partners for our work. So I want to acknowledge our staff who made this happen, our friends at eConsult Solutions who did the report, for these amazing findings. And again, all of our listeners and viewers for being with us today. So stay safe, stay well, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you on the trail. Thanks again. Chimigwech.
The full study, The Benefits of Connecting Canadians, is available to download on TransCanada Trail's website now. In it, you can find detailed case studies looking at the economic, public health, and environmental benefits from select sections of the TransCanada Trail.